My name is Maryanne Kivlehan-Wise. I'm from the Center for Naval Analyses, and I'd like to thank Project 2049 and the Council on Foreign Relations for inviting me to participate in today's events. I know time is brief. Randy had asked me to look at factors and trends currently in place in China that will affect how China may behave in the future in the maritime domain. There's 3 points I want to make. First, I would argue that for PRC leaders, establishing and maintaining strength in the maritime domain bolsters China's core national interests. Now, why do I say this? Because whether we adhere to the logic or not, CCP leaders believe that its legitimacy rests on 2 legs. The first is the ability to safeguard China's territory and sovereignty, and the second is the ability to ensure continued economic growth, or at least maintain economic stability. And there is a maritime component in China's pursuits of each of these objectives. The connection between a strong China in the maritime domain and territorial integrity is fairly straightforward from the Chinese point of view anyway. Beyond the obvious Taiwan contingency, China's leaders believe that in order to preserve its sovereignty, it must be able to protect its maritime borders and exclusive economic zone. Now, this sounds simplistic, but one thing I hear when we go over and speak to members of China's military again and again are 2 points. One is that China has a long coastline and its most valuable assets are located along its coasts, and that's something that they feel that Americans sometimes forget. And the second is that China has received unwelcome visitors via its shores in the past, and they experienced a violent and turbulent regime change as a result. And PRC leaders are just simply not anxious to repeat that experience. Moreover, China has more than a passing economic interest in the maritime domain. Its dependence on the oceans is quite tangible. China relies on maritime transportation for 90% of its imports and exports today. 40% of China's oil comes from the sea, and of that, 80% flows through the Straits of Malacca. The implication is clear. China is dependent on a stable and secure maritime environment in order to safeguard its economic growth. One can attribute at least some of China's investment in its navy as a sign that it is uncomfortable with depending solely on the US to provide this stability. So as we look to the future and ask how China will pursue its core interests, we can expect to see a desire to establish self-reliance when it comes to issues such as ensuring an ability to gain and maintain access to energy resources, to protect key slocks, and for ensuring maritime security and unfettered shipping, at least for its own fleet. I don't expect that we're going to start seeing a rise in benevolence among the Chinese ships for partners that are floating around in its periphery. Point number 2, China's military, and its navy in particular, has been given a mandate to expand strategic depth and prepare for new missions. In December 2004, China's President Hu Jintao delivered a speech in which he delineated 4 key missions for China's military. In addition to the expected charges to protect the party and to protect China's territory and sovereignty, Hu also commanded China's military to protect national development, safeguard China's expanding national interests, and to help maintain world peace. That's a tall order for any military. Now, much has been said and written about China's new historic missions, so I will avoid the temptation to retread that ground. But I do want to highlight the significance of this event. Observers of China's military, especially China's Navy, will be pointing back to the December 2004 speech for some time to come when trying to interpret events that they see unfolding. Since the issuance of the new historic missions, we have seen China's Navy rise in prestige within China's armed forces. Today, the PLA Navy is increasingly viewed as a strategic level force. Now, we saw this, one evidence of this is China's 2006 Defense White Paper. The China's government listed the expansion of China's Navy's strategic depth as a national goal. So they're not being coy about this desire, they're being quite open. Since the 2004 historic missions, much has been written about China's Navy, and there's certain noteworthy developments, and I'm just going to list the broad categories they would fall into. Increasingly sophisticated anti-access capabilities, an increased ability to project force, and an expanded repertoire of operations and operational capabilities. China's Navy is conducting a more diverse set of operations, and this expanded repertoire includes a greater mix of military operations other than war, such as humanitarian and disaster relief and participation in anti-piracy operations. Military operations other than war received a fair amount of attention in China's latest defense white paper, a fact that many would interpret as a sign that we should be expecting to see more, not less, of these types of activities in the future. And in terms of an expanded mix of capabilities, we are seeing an increased capacity to conduct sustained operations further from China's shores and a continued desire to conduct integrated joint operations. They're not where they want to be. They're actually a great distance from where they want to be in some cases, but we can expect that they will continue to work along these lines and that China's Navy will make at least incremental progress in these areas. In some cases, this will provide opportunities for cooperation, such as participation in international disaster relief efforts. And in other cases, we will see signs of increased tensions, such as harassment of foreign ships in China's exclusive economic zone. As others have pointed out, this March, both were taking place simultaneously. I suspect that probably will be the trend for the future. Cooperation far at sea and tension and competition close to China's shores where the real issues are more political than military. Point 3, China's future is not yet written. It's easy to get caught up in the debates over China's strategic intentions. When one looks at military procurements or investments in strategic ports around the globe, one cannot help but start to envision a meticulously thought out plan in which the PRC government has managed to create an international system in which it has veto power over all that has transpired in East Asia, a Chinese Monroe Doctrine of sorts. But when I think of China looking out into the future, I see something a bit different. I think we're unclear about China's intentions because even China doesn't know where China is going. China's national interests have changed profoundly in the last 30 years. Indeed, they've changed a great deal in the last 10 years, for that matter. And the leadership in Beijing is still grappling with the implications of these changes. They're still struggling to find the right balance of military, economic, and diplomatic interests. They're still struggling to determine the best way to manage all of the points of the Chinese bureaucracy that have the potential to affect foreign policy. And they're still struggling to figure out where the military element of national power fits in when you're safeguarding national interests that are not bound by geography. And not only is China still trying to figure out where China is going, but the PLA is working out where the PLA is going at the same time. The PLA Navy is still learning how to use its new capabilities, and the Chinese government is still struggling to figure out where the maritime domain fits within its pursuit of its national interests. In some cases, seemingly fundamental issues are still under debate. PRC and PLA analysts are still debating the best utility for aircraft carriers, or what a blue water navy may mean for China. Indeed, some might look at this current moment in time and see it as a window in which China is rethinking the strategic assessments that will inform its new foreign policy. As these decisions are made, U.S. actions, what we say, do, and write, will no doubt factor into almost every assessment that informs PRC leaders. Now, the optimists among us should see this as a window of opportunity. We could be at a moment when the right message or the right form of engagement, repeated the right number of times, could set the U.S. and China on a path for cooperation into the future. And of course, the cynics among us will point out that it's highly likely that our most powerful shaping effects are going to end up being unintentional. And I suspect both may be true. In the meantime, however, we have no choice but to hope for the best, plan for the worst, and pay careful attention to any insights we can gain into these debates as they unfold. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Let me take the prerogative of the chair, ask the first question, and pick up on one of your last points, Maryanne, about where we, the United States, figure into Chinese planning. Now, you did as asked and talked about specific programs and specific developments underway in the PLA, but you didn't necessarily talk about how we're factoring into this. How much of a driver would you say, Mark, James, and Maryanne, the United States is to China's acquisition strategy? And I don't mean this in an alarmist way, set aside intentions, but in a pure capabilities sense of it. How much of their acquisition strategy is oriented towards the United States, trying to exploit our potential weaknesses, et cetera? How do we factor in?
Well, I'll throw out the obvious answers, and then James and Mark can give the really nuanced points that require more thought. When you look at how China has been developing its strategy in the past, certainly there's no secret that the U.S. factors into all of its planning. When we go and talk to people in the PLA, I've seen some graphics out there where they have a picture of a menacing Captain America, and then bubbles around the Captain America will show different pictures or comments about things that the United States is doing in East Asia.